In the silence before dawn, when the world is stripped of its familiar noise and the weight of distraction lifts just enough to reveal the raw emptiness beneath, there arises a single truth, unadorned, sharp, and unyielding. To live is to suffer, and to suffer is to be. This is no cruel lament, but the first sober breath of awareness that pierces through the comforting veil of illusion. The mind, ceaselessly clinging to fragments of light, hope, desire, identity, cannot bear this nakedness. Yet, it is here, in the dim absence of all false illumination, that the soul encounters itself most honestly. Existence, like a restless sea, churns with waves of want, loss, and fleeting pleasure. The will, that blind and insatiable force within us, drives ceaselessly toward objects that promise fulfillment, but deliver only temporary respite before the tide pulls back again, leaving us more hollow than before. This is not a mere inconvenience, it is the very structure of our being. To seek satisfaction is to enter a labyrinth whose walls close ever tighter, a dance choreographed by absence rather than presence. Modernity, with its promises of endless progress and happiness, merely fans these flames of desire, wrapping the chains of consumption and distraction tighter around the fragile heart. Each attempt to grasp the light, be it success, love, recognition, or fleeting ecstasy, is met with the same silent resistance. The futility of permanence in a world governed by decay. The things we clutch so desperately dissolve beneath our fingers, revealing the futility of the chase. Our suffering is not a punishment, but the natural consequence of the will's striving in a world where nothing can satisfy. Yet, this bitter knowledge need not deepen despair into madness, but rather open a window, a narrow aperture, through which the weary eye might glimpse a different clarity. To acknowledge suffering without turning away is to confront the abyss of self. This abyss is not emptiness, but a mirror reflecting the illusions we hold about who we are. The ego, that fragile construction of memory, desire, and defense, clings to its narrative with fierce desperation. But when the light fades, what remains is a silent witness beneath the tumult of thoughts, a presence untouched by the flickering shadows. This witness knows that identity, with all its drama and complexity, is but a passing shadow, and that beneath the shadow lies an unchanging stillness. Pain, then, is not merely the enemy of happiness, but the threshold through which truth may pass. It strips away the pretenses, the roles we play, the stories we tell ourselves to ward off the silence of being. In pain, the veil thins, and for a fleeting moment, the soul sees beyond the surface the endless churn of desire giving way to the still waters beneath. It is here that surrender takes root, not in defeat, but in a profound acceptance of what is. Surrender is the relinquishing of the futile struggle to impose meaning, control, or permanence upon a world that is inherently transient and indifferent. The relief of honest awareness is subtle, like a soft exhale after a breath held too long. It is not the joy of triumph, but the peace that arises when resistance falls away, and the will no longer demands more than what is given. This peace is not found in the light, but in the absence of it, in the embrace of shadow where the soul can finally rest. The quiet revelation that to let go of the light is not to lose sight, but to see more clearly, emerges like a slow-burning candle, flickering in the vast darkness. In this darkness, the illusion of separateness dissolves. The ego's desperate claim to individuality wanes, revealing the interconnected web of suffering and being. The self, once perceived as a fortress against pain, reveals itself as a fragile vessel carrying the weight of endless longing. Yet, paradoxically, this fragility is not weakness, but the very source of depth and authenticity. To be vulnerable to suffering is to be open to truth. And in this openness lies a strange freedom, the freedom that comes when desire ceases to imprison the soul. The modern world, with its cacophony of distractions and false promises, tries to anesthetize this truth. It sells dreams of escape, of mastery over fate, and endless accumulation of pleasure. But these are mere shadows on the wall, flickering images that vanish when faced with the steady gaze of awareness. The soul that dares to look beyond them finds only the austere beauty of what is bare, unadorned, and utterly real. The journey inward is not a path of light, but a passage through shadow, a descent into the depths where the noise of the mind falls silent. Here, the metaphysical physician waits not to heal with platitudes, but to lay bare the wounds that the will inflicts upon itself. The recognition that suffering is not failure, but the very condition of life, brings with it a sober grace, a quiet companionship with the inevitable. As the soul moves deeper into this solitude of truth, the false self unravels like mist before dawn. There is no victory here, no transcendence over pain, only the surrender to its presence. The illusion of control dissolves, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered experience of being fragile, transient, and whole in its impermanence. To let go of the light is to seize the futile chase and stand naked in the vastness of existence. It is to accept the shadow not as enemy but as companion, to find in darkness not despair but the profound clarity of what simply is. And in this surrender, the soul glimpses a silence deeper than any noise, a stillness more enduring than any fleeting joy or sorrow. Thus, the voice that speaks here is not a beacon to guide or a flame to warm, but a quiet mirror held before the soul in crisis, a reflection of the solitary truth that all must face. The path of suffering is the path of seeing, and to see, truly, is to let go of all light that blinds. Suffering is the shadow cast by the will, inevitable as nightfall and just as impartial. It does not discriminate between kings and beggars, the learned and the ignorant, the exalted and the broken. Its presence is the inescapable pulse beneath all forms of life, a ceaseless drumbeat, echoing the restless yearning at the heart of existence. The will is a force without mercy, blind to reason or justice, a relentless hunger that cannot be satisfied because it is not hunger for something outside, but hunger itself. To want is to suffer, for the will knows no rest. It knows only the void it endlessly attempts to fill with its ceaseless striving. This ceaseless striving is the essence of illusion. The mind, desperate to impose meaning on the meaningless, erects fragile castles of desire, belief, and identity upon the shifting sands of impermanence. These castles glitter in the light of transient pleasures, but crumble with the inevitable approach of loss, decay, and death. The ego clings desperately to these illusions, like a drowning man clutching at driftwood, seeking in them a refuge from the overwhelming tide of existence. But the refuge is a mirage, a trick of light that fades the moment the eye stops chasing and turns inward. Detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the absence of the illusion that feeling defines us. It is the quiet surrender to the truth that all things are transient and that suffering arises from our attachment to what must, by the nature of reality, pass away. To detach is to recognize the futility of resistance against the flow of becoming. It is not cold indifference, but a sober compassion toward the self, a compassion born from seeing clearly the machinery of the will at work and the suffering it creates in its ceaseless dance. This detachment is not apathy, but lucidity, a clarity sharpened by the recognition of impermanence. The modern world offers many distractions to avoid this lucidity. It fills the silence with noise, the emptiness with objects, the void with endless activity. Yet, beneath the surface of this busyness lies a profound exhaustion, a spiritual malaise born from the relentless pursuit of illusions. The soul, starved of stillness, cries out in its loneliness. Yet few hear, for the mind prefers the comfortable numbness of distraction to the raw truth of pain. To confront suffering directly is to stand at the edge of the abyss, to face the void without flinching, and in that act to reclaim a fragment of freedom. Freedom does not come from mastering the world or bending it to our will. It comes from surrendering the will itself. It is the quiet victory of seeing the futility of striving and resting in the stillness beyond desire. This stillness is not a blank void, but a deep wellspring from which the soul drinks when it stops feeding the flames of craving. In this stillness, the restless waves of suffering subside, not because they cease to exist, but because the soul no longer resists their presence. The pain remains, but it loses its power to torment when it is met with a steady gaze that does not shrink or rebel. To see suffering clearly is to see through the veil of illusion that the will weaves. The ego's narratives, the stories of selfhood, control, and permanence, are threads in a fragile tapestry that the slightest breath of truth can unravel. When the tapestry falls away, what remains is neither despair nor hope, but the luminous shadow of what simply is. It is a revelation stripped of all embellishment, a profound sobriety that accepts existence in its raw, unmediated form. Here, the soul stands naked, free from the masks of identity and the chains of desire. This nakedness is the true home of the spirit, a place where suffering is no longer the enemy, but the doorway. Each moment of pain is a fissure through which light may enter, not the light of illumination that dazzles and blinds, but a quiet light that reveals the contours of truth with gentle precision. In this light, the soul glimpses the paradox at the heart of existence, that to suffer is not to fail, but to be alive, and that to be alive is to be bound inseparably to the ebb and flow of desire and loss. The detachment that arises from this recognition is not a withdrawal from life, but an embrace of its full depth. It is the awareness that the will's demands are ultimately insatiable, and that peace cannot be found in fulfilling them. This peace comes only when the will ceases to demand. It is the silence after the storm, the pause between breaths, where the soul finds refuge not in what is gained or lost, but in what simply is, unadorned and unchanged by the flickering light of hope or despair. Thus, the path is not one of accumulation, but of letting go of the light that blinds, the illusions that bind, the desires that chain. It is a slow unraveling of all that is false, a patient surrender to the eternal rhythm of becoming and passing away. In this surrender, there is a strange dignity, a quiet acceptance that does not seek to escape suffering, but to live within it fully, without resistance or illusion. The soul that walks this path is neither triumphant nor defeated. It is simply awake, bearing witness to the ceaseless dance of shadow and light, desire and loss, suffering and release. It carries the weight of existence with a solemn grace, knowing that the deepest clarity comes not from grasping but from relinquishing, not from the pursuit of light but from the courage to dwell in shadow. And so, in the stillness that follows, there is a subtle unfolding, a slow and quiet unraveling of the self's illusions, until all that remains is the simple, undeniable presence of being. Here, in this place beyond striving and despair, the soul touches the edges of a truth too vast for words. That to let go of the light is to see with eyes unclouded, to know with a heart unburdened, and to be with what is, utterly and without reservation. The soul's descent into this darkness is not a fall, but a reckoning. It is a slow unraveling of all pretenses, a peeling away of the layers the will has wrapped around itself to hide from the stark truth of existence. The more tightly we cling to illusion, the more violently suffering insists upon its presence. Yet, when we finally loosen our grip, when the ego's desperate clutch softens the rawness, beneath is revealed a vast emptiness that is neither void nor fullness, but the fertile ground from which all illusion springs and to which all illusion must return. In this emptiness, the restless will lose its purchase. Desire no longer binds the heart with invisible chains, for the heart has ceased to believe in the promises the will whispers. These promises of permanence, identity, happiness are specters that haunt the mind, luring it into a labyrinth of endless pursuit. But the labyrinth has no center, no sanctuary. It is a cruel architecture, constructed by the will to imprison itself. To see this is to begin the slow dismantling of the self's delusions, one shadow at a time. Pain, too, reveals its dual nature in this illumination. It is the sharp blade that cuts through illusion, the fire that consumes falsehood, and yet it is also the unchanging witness to the soul's endurance. The will suffers because it seeks to deny suffering, to replace it with satisfaction that can never be found. But the soul, when stripped bare, understands that suffering is not an aberration, but the very texture of life's fabric. Is to resist existence itself. To accept it is to flow with the current of being, no longer battling the tide, but moving with it, surrendered and serene. The heart, burdened by this realization, does not collapse into nihilism, but expands into a quiet space of profound solitude. This solitude is not loneliness, but the meeting place of truth with itself. It is the stillness between the notes of a sorrowful song, the hollow within the wave where the sea breathes in silence. In this solitude, the soul finds a refuge from the illusions of selfhood and the illusions of the world alike. Here, there is no need to grasp or reject, no need to construct meaning or flee from it, only the bare fact of being, clear and unyielding. Yet, this solitude is not a final destination, but a threshold. Beyond it lies a profound paradox. The self that dissolves into silence is not lost, but found in its truest form. This form is without boundaries, without desires or fears, a presence that is both empty and full empty of illusion, full of reality. It is a presence that does not cling to light, but rests in the absence of light, unafraid of the dark, because it recognizes that darkness is not nothingness, but the ground of all becoming. To dwell in this ground is to embody detachment, not as negation, but as completion. Detachment is not the cold severing of ties, but the warm release of the self from the chains of its own making. It is the peaceful knowing that the will's demands are like shadows cast on a wall, intangible, shifting, and ultimately unsubstantial. When the soul ceases to chase these shadows, it is no longer caught in the endless cycle of suffering, but moves in a different rhythm, one measured by acceptance rather than desire, by presence rather than pursuit. This rhythm is not heard by the ears, nor seen by the eyes, but felt in the quiet depths of being. It is the pulse of life, untouched by illusion, the subtle movement of the soul when it ceases to wrestle with existence and instead embraces it fully wounded, fragile and free. The soul knows that this freedom is not a conquest, but a surrender, not a rising above, but a sinking into the depths of what simply is. And so, the journey continues, never forward, never away, but deeper and deeper into the heart of truth. Each step dissolves another veil. Each breath releases another fragment of illusion, until the self is no more than a fading echo in the vast silence. This silence is not emptiness, but the fullness of all that remains when the will is still. It is the final refuge where suffering and joy, light and shadow, birth and death dissolve into one unbroken presence. Here, at the edge of all things, the soul glimpses a clarity that is both terrifying and beautiful, a clarity born not of light, but of darkness, not of hope, but of surrender. It is the quiet, knowing that all striving is vanity, all desire a mirage, and that true seeing comes only when the eyes close to the world and open inward, into the abyss where the self dissolves and the eternal stillness waits. In this stillness, the soul rests no longer a prisoner of its own making, no longer a slave to the will's endless demands. It rests in the simple fact of existence, aware but unbound, present but untouched. This rest is not an end but a presence, a slow-burning candle flickering gently in the vast night, a solitary lantern lighting the path through shadow, a quiet voice whispering a truth that cannot be spoken but only known. To let go of the light is to see more clearly, to suffer fully is to be free, and in the stillness of surrender, the soul finally knows itself as it truly is, unbroken, eternal and whole. The soul's liberation is neither a triumph nor a tragedy, but a profound cessation, a quiet ending to the restless dialogue between desire and despair. It is in this cessation that the true nature of suffering is revealed, not as a burden to be borne or a wound to be healed, but as the very texture of life itself. The will, ceaseless and insatiable, is the engine of torment, yet it is also the source of our deepest clarity when seen without illusion. To look unflinchingly at suffering is to see the will reflected in its purest form, a force that does not relent, that does not discriminate, that knows no purpose other than its own endless craving. Yet, beneath this force lies a stillness that is not born of resistance but of surrender. The will's ceaseless demands give way, not through force or conquest, but through a gentle yielding that the ego cannot understand. This yielding is not weakness, but the ultimate strength, the recognition that to fight the nature of being is to deepen one's own suffering, while to accept it is to transcend it. This transcendence is no escape, but a deeper immersion into the fabric of reality, where the soul ceases to be a separate entity and becomes one with the unchanging truth beneath all change. Illusion, the ego's fortress, falls away in this immersion, revealing the emptiness at its core. This emptiness is not a void, but a mirror, reflecting the soul's true nature, a nature untouched by the flux of pleasure and pain, birth and death. In this mirror, the self dissolves into a vast openness, a spaciousness that holds both the light and the shadow without preference or fear. Here, the soul learns that detachment is not the absence of feeling, but the absence of clinging, that to be truly free is to love without possession, to suffer without resistance, to live without the illusion of control. The modern world, with its relentless noise and ceaseless motion, offers little space for such detachment. It promises fulfillment through consumption, distraction, and achievement. Yet these are but fleeting shadows that deepen the soul's loneliness. The true refuge lies not in external abundance, but in the inner sanctuary where the will's demands are stilled. This sanctuary is hard-won and often only glimpsed through the cracks of suffering, where the light of truth seeps in to illuminate the soul's hidden depths. To dwell in this sanctuary is to embrace the paradox of existence, that suffering and peace are not opposites, but intertwined threads in the same tapestry. The soul that sees this no longer seeks to escape pain, but welcomes it as a guide, a teacher, a doorway to deeper awareness. In this welcome, suffering loses its sting and becomes a sacred companion on the journey inward, a reminder of the soul's vulnerability and its capacity for profound insight. This insight is not a destination, but a continual unfolding, a slow unraveling of the self's illusions, until only the essence remains a silent, watchful presence that knows itself beyond the confines of identity and desire. This presence is not passive, but alert, not detached, but deeply engaged with the reality of suffering and joy alike. It moves through life with a solemn grace, carrying the weight of existence with quiet dignity, neither resisting nor clinging, simply being. The rhythm of this being is unlike any other. It is measured not by the ticking of the clock or the beating of the heart, but by the ebb and flow of surrender and awareness. Each moment is a breath drawn in the stillness between the storms, a step taken on the narrow path that leads not away from suffering but through it, toward a clarity that is both terrifying and beautiful. This clarity is not an answer, but a question posed in silence, a mystery held in the depths of the soul. To follow this path is to walk alone, for few dare to face the shadow without the light's distraction. It is a solitary pilgrimage into the heart of what is, where the soul meets its own reflection in the dark waters of truth. Here, all illusions fall away, the masks of identity, the fantasies of permanence, the promises of happiness, and what remains is the bare, unyielding presence of being. This presence is a strange and fragile thing, both infinitely vast and intimately close. It holds the paradox of existence, in its embrace the simultaneous reality of suffering and peace, loss and gain, death and life. To rest in this presence is to know a freedom beyond freedom, a silence beyond silence, a light beyond light. It is the final surrender, the last letting go, where the soul dissolves into the stillness from which it arose. And in that stillness, there is no longer any need to seek, no longer any fear to overcome, no longer any desire to fulfill. There is only the quiet unfolding of what simply is, a slow-burning candle flickering against the endless night, a solitary lantern guiding the soul home, not to a place of light, but to the profound clarity that comes when all light fades and only truth remains. The final moment arrives, not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper, a fading breath exhaled into the vast stillness where time dissolves and all becoming ceases. Here, the soul no longer struggles against the dark, but sinks willingly into its depths, as a leaf falls softly into a silent pond, merging with the depths that neither reject nor hold, but simply are. The will, once a roaring tempest, quiets to a mere sigh, a distant echo fading beyond the horizon of consciousness. This sigh is neither sorrow nor relief, but the barest trace of existence acknowledging itself before dissolving into nothingness. In this dissolution, the self that once grasped and suffered dissolves like mist at dawn, revealing the emptiness beneath the emptiness that is not absence but fullness, not void but the womb of all that ever was or will be. There is no more mine, only the vast and unbroken silence, where suffering and joy, life and death, light and shadow are held together in a timeless embrace. This silence is not barren, but pregnant with the unspoken truth that all things arise and pass, yet the essence remains untouched, eternally free from the delusions of form. To inhabit this silence is to be without measure or boundary, to drift beyond the fragile shorelines of identity into the boundless sea of being. The soul's hunger ceases because it recognizes its own insatiability. The will's endless craving vanishes because it sees the futility of its desire. There is no victory here, no conquest of pain, only the gentle yielding to what is this unyielding, uncompromising reality that neither consoles nor condemns, but simply is. To surrender so completely is to find the strange comfort of truth, the truth that suffering is not failure, not a curse, but the very ground from which clarity springs. And so, the candle flickers one last time, casting its pale glow across the shadowed landscape of the soul. It does not fight the darkness, but merges with it, a solitary flame dissolving into the infinite night. The light fades, and with it, the illusion that light was the path at all. For the path is the darkness itself, the quiet, unyielding presence beneath all things, the soil in which the soul's deepest knowing takes root. To let go of the light is not to lose sight, but to see with eyes unclouded by desire, to hear the silent music beneath the noise, to touch the stillness beneath the storm. Here, in this place beyond longing and fear, beyond hope and despair, the soul rests naked, unbound, utterly itself, without the burden of becoming. It rests in the solitude that is no longer loneliness, but a profound communion with what simply is. The self vanishes, and with its disappearance, all suffering loses its grip. What remains is the slow, steady pulse of being, the quiet breath of existence that carries the soul beyond all illusion and into the serene clarity of eternal night. And in this clarity, there is no need for words, no need for meaning, no need for light. There is only the infinite unfolding of the now silent, boundless whole.